State's ready to proceed?
Well, Judge, I would like to bring something up again.
Okay, this is ready. Judge Fred. Go ahead.
I remember a little bit earlier the defense saying something about calling Officer Andrew, that there was something in his deposition about him setting the video up. I went back and looked, Mr. Rojo looked, we don't see that. Is that right?
I didn't see it in his deposition, but maybe it was referenced in another witness's deposition that he was the one who set up the equipment. And we would also potentially call him for the purpose of stating that he's the one who called Eric Rivera Sr. to say they had Eric in custody and made arrangements for Eric Rivera Sr. to come and see him.
All right, well, so earlier there was a single reason. I checked this out and it's not there. And now there are some additional reasons. I haven't seen an email from the defense listing him. Do you see emails there?
No, I don't, Judge. I intended to send one. I have a problem with my Outlook. I have a whole bunch of messages stuck in there. But we maintain our formal position. There's no surprise to the state. They're aware of what he works for them. They have time to talk to him for tomorrow.
I don't have time if I can't get a hold of him, which I've not been able to do yet. So all that really remains to be seen. And if I remember correctly, the defense waited until after I arrested to list him. Is that right?
With the record to speak for itself.
I thought it was before or after.
I beg your pardon?
I thought it was before or after. I suspect it was after.
If you had his name, the entire, I beg your pardon?
It was after you arrested.
All right. So the words that come to mind are racist, elaborate.
The thing that speaks for itself. Now, the word that comes to your mind is rebuttal, like their rebuttal is.
You don't have rebuttal. You list witnesses that you anticipate calling. The state has rebuttal.
We can't anticipate that you guys are going to create a misapprehension as to whether taking equipment was there. Your witness created a false impression with the jury that they had to scramble to tape this stuff and that it wasn't available all day long, when it was. So we didn't anticipate that. Just like you're saying, you may not anticipate some things that the defendant may or may not say if he testifies.
Do you continue to try and contact it's the sergeant, isn't it? Andrews?
Yes.
And Judge, I believe that phrase is the thing speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Oh, if we can move on from Latin class.
Okay. We'll get an updated one as well as the defense to state that any or is able to contact when all of that is available. Then I'll take it from there. If not available, I don't need to go do it. Okay.
And we're ready to have witnesses in here.
All right. Got all yours? Missing one? Need 2 minutes? Okay.
I asked my secretary to check to see if he was under subpoena or not, and she has texted me that no, I did not subpoena him because he's retired.
He's retired?
Yes, now, I didn't remember that or whether he's working for some other agency. I could ask her if she could double check, but
Well, we can't locate him.
she responded, didn't subpoena.
Well, we got detectives to go outside, so maybe detectives can give us an idea on it too. If he's retired, he's not around, hasn't been subpoenaed, he's not on subpoena from the state, then I don't know what we're going to do. Being creative.
That's not for you. I have it down there for Christine.
Okay.
I believe you want to talk about it.
I would do that because I already.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
Present, accounted for, Judge.
All right, proceed, please. Bench, any close first witness?
Yes, Judge, the bench calls Jeremy Gallo.
Raise your right hand, just so you know, have a seat for the microphone on top.
Do you swear from the initial that you will the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
All right, have a seat there. There's a microphone. That's what y'all hear you. And Mr. Brothers, when you're ready, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Jeremy.
Good afternoon.
Now, if you could state your name for the record.
Jeremy Gabriel,
Okay. And can everyone hear? Okay. All right. How old are you now, Jeremy? Okay. I think, okay. If you sit back, the mic will pick you up.
Yeah, and too close.
Okay. Now, are you working right now?
no ma'am.
Okay. And what is your relationship to Eric?
He's my cousin.
Now, going back to November 30th of 2007, do you remember that day?
Yes ma'am.
How old were you at the time?
I was 18 at the time.
Okay. And who is Devon?
That's my little brother.
Okay. And do you know Charles Wardlow?
Yes ma'am.
And how do you know Charles?
That's my cousin.
Do you know Venja Hunt?
Yes ma'am.
And how do you know Venja?
We play high school football together.
Okay. Were you still playing football together on the same team in November 30th?
No ma'am.
Okay. And why not?
Objection.
Gene,
And do you know Timmy Brown?
No ma'am.
And do you know Jason Mitchell?
Yes ma'am.
Okay. And how do you know Jason?
We went to school together.
Now, on November 30th of 2007, where were you going to school?
Florida Christian Institute.
And where's the school located?
It was located in Fort Myers at the time.
Now, earlier that morning of November 30th, what were you doing?
I was driving. I woke up that morning to get ready for school, and I was driving ahead and going to school.
And when you were driving to school, who was in the car with you?
Me, my little brother Devon, my cousin Charles, and my cousin Eric.
Okay. And why were you all riding to school together?
We were all riding to school. That's normally what we do. We all carpool with each other.
Okay. And where was everyone sitting inside the car?
I was in the driver's seat. My brother was in the back passenger, back alongside behind me. Eric was in the passenger, and Charles was by the sliding door.
Okay. Now, what type of car was this you were driving?
I don't know the exact model, but it was a minivan. It was like a teal color green.
Okay. And was it your car?
No ma'am, it was my mother's car.
Okay. So your mom would let you use it to drive to school?
Yes ma'am.
Now, did you go to school that day?
No ma'am.
What happened while you were on your way to school that day?
As I started heading towards school, I turned down Nottingham, and then when I made that left out of Nottingham, I noticed a police cruiser coming up behind me, swinging with his lights on. So I stopped at the stop sign. I turned my blinker on to turn right, but as I turned right, I noticed he got behind me again. So my cousin told me to stop, and I pulled over.
Okay. And what were you thinking when you first saw the police car?
I was kind of thinking it wasn't nothing. Maybe it would have been the back light, like because I got stopped the night before for that same light.
Okay.
So,
And you said when you turned right,
Yes,
the
ma'am.
police car was still behind you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And your cousin told you to stop?
Yes, ma'am.
Which cousin are you referring to?
overrule, next question.
Which cousin told you to stop?
My cousin Eric.
Okay. Now, did you stop for the patrol car?
Yes, ma'am.
When you stopped for the police car, what happened?
When I stopped for the car, the officer, he got out the car and walked up to my side of the window, and he asked me for my driver's license and registration.
Okay. And do you know which officer that was?
Yes, ma'am.
And which officer was it?
Officer Gonzalez.
Okay. And is that Officer Gonzalez from the Fort Myers Police Department?
Yes, ma'am.
So he asked for your license, insurance, and registration. And what did you do at that point?
At that point, I handed him everything, and he told me to stay in the car and turn the car off and wait for him to come back to my side of the window.
And did you do as he asked you to?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what happened at that point?
At that point, I noticed a lot more officers started to pull up, and then Officer Gonzalez, he walked back to my side of the window.
Okay. Do you know how many officers there were?
It was 2 police cruisers behind his, and then there was a lot of unmarked vehicles.
Okay. And where were the unmarked vehicles in relation to your van?
I know one of them was on the driver's side, like parked off to the side. It was like parked off to the side in the middle of the street.
And What happened when Officer Gonzalez came back to the car?
When he came back to the car, he asked me could I take the car keys out, but the key was actually stuck in the ignition, so I couldn't take it out. So I just gave him my house keys, and he asked me to step out the vehicle.
Okay. And did you step out of the van?
Yes, ma'am.
And what happened when you stepped out of the van?
When I stepped out of the van, he asked me to put my hands on the hood, and he proceeded to pat me down.
Okay. And what were you thinking at that point?
At that point, I was kind of scared because I didn't really know what was going on, but I just went on here and obeyed his orders and did what he told me to do.
And what happened when he patted you down?
After he patted me down, he told me he was going to place me in handcuffs. He said it was a safety procedure for the officer.
Okay. So at that point when you were placed in handcuffs, did you feel that you were free to leave?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Did you ever try to leave?
No, ma'am.
And why not?
It never crossed my mind that I could leave the way they had us.
Okay. And what happened after you were placed in handcuffs?
After I was placed in handcuffs, he walked me over to a white SUV and he put me in the back seat of it.
Okay. Now the SUV, was it marked with the Fort Myers police insignia?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And did it have any markings on it at all?
No, ma'am.
And what happened when you were placed in that car?
When he placed me in the truck, I was in there with 3 other gentlemen, one sitting next to me and 2 in the front seat, and we proceeded to leave the scene.
Okay. Now, were you able to see what was happening with your brother and your cousins when you were placed into the white SUV?
No, ma'am. From my understanding, he was going to let them go and let them all go to school.
Hearsay.
Sustained. Did you not disregard that last answer?
Okay. And do you know the names of the individuals in the white SUV?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And what was your understanding of what was happening to you?
To my understanding, they was taking me downtown for questioning, but they never told me what it was about.
Okay. And what happened once you were in the car? Did you go away from the scene of the traffic stop?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what happened as you were leaving the traffic stop?
As I was sitting in the back seat, I noticed the gentleman, he kept looking at me and watching me, I guess trying to get a feel for me.
Okay.
And then once we passed, I was like, are we going downtown still? And he was like, no, we're going to take you somewhere else.
Now, were you able to see where you were going?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the reason, why did you ask whether or not you were going downtown?
Because the way to downtown, you would have had to make a right at the light of, I think it's Ortez and 82. You would have had to make a right instead. He kept going straight through the light.
And when they told you you weren't going downtown, what were you thinking at that point?
Objection.
Sustained.
As to what he was thinking, Judge? Just may we have a sidebar? All right, Jeremy, let me back up for a moment. When you first were at the traffic stop, do you recall about what time that happened?
I'd say about 10:30 to 11.
Okay. And were you eventually taken to the FDLE building?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do you know about what time it was when you got to FDLE?
Not the exact time. They never told me what time.
Now, had you ever been to the FDLE building before?
No, ma'am. That was my very first time going.
Okay. Did you even know the building was there?
No, ma'am.
Now, what happened once you arrived at FDLE?
Once I arrived at the FDLE building, they took me out the car and I fell asleep in the chair. They kept asking me did I want something to eat or something to drink. The only thing I wanted was to call my mother, and they kept telling me no.
Okay. And who did you ask to call your mom?
I asked the guy whose office it was, and then I kept asking a lot of gentlemen who kept walking back and forth through the hallway.
And when you asked to call your mom, did they ever give you the phone?
No, ma'am.
Do you recall exactly how many times you asked to call your mom?
Practically the whole time I was there.
Okay. And why did you want to call your mom?
Because I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. I mean, at least let me talk to my mom, tell her where I'm at so she won't be worried about me or anything.
Okay. Now, you said they kept offering you food. Did you take any food?
No, ma'am. I just wanted to call my mother.
Okay. And did they offer you bathroom breaks?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you ever go to the restroom?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall about what time it was when you went to the restroom?
No, ma'am, not the exact time. It wasn't any clocks on the wall in the office, so I couldn't actually know how long I was there.
Now, did you have anything to do while you were in the office?
No, ma'am, I was just sitting in the chair. After I took a nap, I woke up. I asked them, can I use the bathroom, and that's about it.
Okay. And did anything happen while you were going to the restroom?
Yes, ma'am.
And what happened?
As I was walking to the bathroom, the gentleman was walking behind me, directing me to the bathroom. Something caught my attention, and I looked to the left, and I noticed that a lot of detectives and regular police officers was in the room with my little brother.
Okay. And that's your brother, Devon?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you do anything when you saw that they were around Devon?
Yes, ma'am. Immediately, I got upset because at the time, my brother was a minor, and I knew that officers are not allowed to talk to him.
Okay. Now, how old was Devon at the time?
He was 16 years old.
And did the officers do anything in response to what you said to them?
No, ma'am. The guy told me to be quiet and keep walking.
Okay. Now, after you went to the restroom, did you go back to the office?
Yes, ma'am.
And what happened when you went back to the office?
As I sat in the office, then another gentleman, he came in there, and they took me into the interrogation room.
And do you know which officers or the names of any of those people?
No, ma'am, but if I see them, I know I can directly point them out to you.
Okay. And when you went to the interrogation room, can you describe that room for us?
It was The one I was in, it was like a long table, and they had with the chair back against the wall, and they had me sit on that side of the chair while they sat on the other side.
Okay. And how many people were in the room with you?
It was just 2 guys.
Okay. And what happened while you were in that room?
When I was in that room, they started asking me questions about how I knew my cousin Eric, how we were related, and asking me did I know why was I down there.
Okay. Now, at any point were you read your Miranda rights?
No, ma'am.
And did you answer their question?
That's right.
How long were they questioning you?
I'd say for about 30 minutes to an hour.
Now, while you were there, at any point did you try to leave?
No, ma'am, it never crossed my mind that I could.
Okay. Now, after they were done questioning you, what happened at that point?
After they were done, they took me up out the room, and I asked them to call my mother one more time. They told me they was about to let us go. So as they walked me out the office, he told me that I could leave, and I asked him for my car keys and my phone.
Okay. Now, when they told you were about to leave, did they ever give you your phone back?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Did you get your car keys back?
Yeah, I got my house keys, man. The ring that my car keys was on.
Okay. Now, what happened at the point when you were giving your keys back?
As me and my brother, we had to get buzzed out to let us out the FBLE building. So as we walked out, we asked them what were they going to do with our 2 cousins.
Objection.
Sustained.
Just may we approach? So, you were giving your keys back, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And where were you when you were giving your keys back?
I was standing in the lobby. I was going to get ready to leave out.
Okay. Did you see anyone else in the lobby?
I actually seen my little brother. He was standing that way down.
Okay. Did you see Eric again that day?
No, ma'am.
Did you see Charles again that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when did you see Charles?
I actually seen Charles when we were getting ready to walk out the building, and he was standing in front of the window.
I can object to what he saw. I object if he's going to say what's not the same.
Okay.
Okay, so you saw Charles, and where was Charles when you saw him?
He was standing in his room, but you can like see him through the window, and he had threw his hands up at me.
Okay. And Did you leave FDLE?
Yes, ma'am. I actually asked the officers when they're going to let my cousin go. And
Don't tell us what they said.
Now, as you were leaving FDLE, without going into what the officer said to you, who left FDLE with you?
just me and my little brother, Rivera.
Okay. So Eric never left with you?
No, ma'am.
And Charles never left with
No,
you?
ma'am.
Where did you go after you left FDLE?
Immediately, I headed to my mother's job
Okay. And why did you go to your mother's job?
because I knew she was going to be upset that she couldn't get in contact with us all day, and she had to be to work earlier that day.
Okay. Now, were you supposed to give your mom a car so she could drive to work?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you able to do that?
No, ma'am.
Why not?
Because we had got stopped and took all the, well, I got to it first. I didn't know they wanted to take everyone down. I was thinking that the car was going to be taken to her.
Okay. Did you know the van was taken to FDLE?
No, ma'am.
When did you learn the van was there?
Actually, when I came outside the lobby and I seen the park in the parking lot.
Now, did you ever get your cell phone back?
No, ma'am.
Just if I may have just one moment.
Yes.
Now, so it was about 10:30 when you were stopped, is that correct?
That's my like in the morning.
Okay. And what time was school starting that day?
School usually starts at 9 o'clock.
Okay. Then, were you late for school?
Not me technically, because I had obtained all my credits, so I could have came to school at any time I wanted, just as long as I came.
Okay. And were your brother and Eric and Charles late for school?
Yeah, they were actually there.
Okay. Why were y'all running late that day?
We probably overslept.
Okay. And were you ever asked to drive the van to FDLE?
No, ma'am.
And how did you get to FDLE?
I rode in the backseat of the white SUV with 3 detectives.
Now, were you separated from your brother the entire time you were at FDLE?
Yes, ma'am. I actually never knew he was there.
And how long was it, or what time was it when you left FDLE?
It was probably about 8:30, 8:45, because I got my mother's job like 9, 9:30, like somewhere up in that range.
Okay. And what was your mom's reaction when you saw her?
Sustained.
And at any point while you were at FDLE, were you able to call your mom?
No, ma'am.
Nothing further, Judge.
Mr. Gabriel,
Yes, sir.
am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's Gabriel.
I beg your pardon?
Gabriel.
Gabriel.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm assuming you were on your way to school that day.
Yes, sir.
The people in the car were late to school, right?
Yes, sir.
And the people in the car are Eric Rivera, who's your cousin,
Yes, sir.
Charles Wardlow, who's your cousin,
Yes, sir.
and your brother.
Yes, sir.
So you knew that you had a bad light in your car, right?
Yes, sir.
And you weren't surprised that you were pulled over, right?
Because actually, I see it all the time. Officers driving up fast behind you with their lights on, and they don't actually stop you. They're just using it to go around you to go somewhere else to another car or something that they might have had.
Hadn't you been stopped before because of that light?
Yes, sir.
So when the police first pulled you over, you weren't concerned about it?
Yes, sir. I was concerned, but I didn't really think nothing of it because I didn't actually know he was coming to pull us over.
So you stated that Officer Gonzalez handcuffed you.
Yes, sir.
Your keys were stuck in the ignition?
The key that cranks the car,
Couldn't get it out?
couldn't get it out. It was stuck in the ignition.
And you traveled back to FDLE, so you couldn't drive it anywhere from there.
No, sir.
But the last time you saw the key, it was literally stuck in the ignition.
Yes, sir.
Had you turned the car off?
Yes, sir.
When you went back to FDLE, the officers there were polite to you, weren't they?
Not really.
Did they offer you food?
They offered me food, but that wasn't my concern. My concern was calling my mother.
They offered you a bathroom?
Yes, when I asked could I use the bathroom, they let me know.
They took you to someone's office, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you see family pictures in the office?
No, sir.
You saw other pictures in the office?
Yes, sir.
But you could see that it was someone's office?
Yes, sir.
You're old enough to know that, aren't you?
Yeah.
But you're telling the jury that there was no telephone in that office?
No, sir, not that I remember.
The interrogation room that you described earlier, you called it an interrogation room, right?
Yes, sir.
It was a conference room, right?
I don't remember if it was a conference room or not, but I just know the way they had it set up, I would think it as an interrogation room.
There were no bars?
No, sir.
There was no cell?
No, sir.
You weren't handcuffed at that time, assuming you
No,
even
sir.
were handcuffed,
They
right?
took the handcuffs off me directly as they took me into the office when I first got there.
When they talked with you in the conference room, or the room with the long table, am I right about that?
Yes, sir.
And in order to get to that room, did you have to pass by an auditorium of some kind?
I don't remember.
They asked you what you knew about Eric Rivera,
Yes, sir.
right? They asked you about Sean Taylor.
They asked me, did I see anything on the news about his murder?
Well, they asked you what you knew about it, didn't they?
Yes, sir. They asked me that too.
And you told them that you didn't know anything,
Yes, sir.
and they let you go.
No, they kept pressing on and asking me questions that I know anything, but I kept telling them no. I actually told them I want my mom, and I put my head down, and the detective got angry with me.
Were you arrested that day?
No, sir.
Is it your testimony that you were let go from Florida Department of Law Enforcement at 8:30, 8:45 in the evening?
Yes, ma'am, like around that time.
Excuse me?
Yes, sir, like around that time.
Now, Eric Rivera is your cousin, right?
Yes, sir.
Charles Wardlow is your cousin?
Yes, sir.
And they're not only your cousins, they're friends of yours.
Yeah, my cousin first, family first.
Family first, but also friends,
I wouldn't look at them as his friends, sir.
because blood is thicker than water.
Yes, sir, it's family. They're family to me. They're not my friends.
You care for them.
Yes, sir.
You want to help them if you can, right?
Yes, sir.
You had been with them earlier that day,
Yes, sir. They was all over at my mother's house with me.
and you were there with them the day of November the 26th of 2007, weren't you, all together?
Scope of directions.
Stand.
You hang out with them, don't you?
Yes, sir. Me and Eric actually hang together.
That's all the questions I have at this time.
Read it.
Now, you were asked, were the officers polite to you? Did you feel they were being polite to you?
Not when I asked about calling my mom.
And what was their demeanor when you asked to call your mom?
One kept saying I had to ask his supervisor. Then I asked another gentleman. Then I asked another gentleman who was walking through the hallway. I asked him, he just ignored me, and I just kept asking, could I call my mom?
And how long were you there that day?
Probably from the time I arrived there all the way to late that evening at night.
Okay. Nothing further, good.
Give those maybe excuse, thank you.
And you're going to call Devon Mays.
Sir, just stand in front of the court and raise your right hand.
This is where he is. They have to see the microphone outside the judge.
Do you swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do.
All right, so have a seat. There's a microphone. Speak towards it, not right up against it. So you can all hear you. If you're ready, Mr. Rivera, you can proceed.
All right. Good afternoon, Devon. Now, if you could state your name for the record and how you spell your last name.
M-A-Y-E-S.
Now, Devon, how old are you today?
2.
And how far did you go in school?
GD.
Now, going back to November 30th of 2007, do you remember that day? Now, how old were you at the time?
16.
Now, were you in school back then? Where were you in school? And who else went to school there?
Me, my brother, Jeremy, my cousin Charles, and Eric.
Now, on November 30th, what were you doing that morning?
We was at school.
And about what time does school normally start?
We was about 8:30.
Okay. And what grade were you in?
I was junior.
Now, did school start at a different time for Jeremy?
No, we had a date. We weren't late.
Okay.
We were late.
Now, did you normally ride to school together?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you have a license at the time?
Yes, ma'am.
So, whose car were you in when you were going to school that morning?
We was in my mom's van.
And who was driving?
Jeremy.
Now, you said your cousin is Charles, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that Charles Wardlow?
Yes, ma'am.
And how are you related to Charles?
We're not blood, but my family knows his family. We were pretty close, so we grew up constantly.
Now, is Eric your cousin?
Yes, ma'am. Like Stella. He's my stepdad.
Okay. And how are you related to Eric?
My dad, he was from our first business.
Okay.
My stepdad, I'm my first business.
Now, are you nervous?
Good.
All right. Let me know if you need to take a break. So, going back to November 30th, did you go to school that day?
No, ma'am.
And what happened to keep you from going to school?
We got pulled.
And around what time was it when you got pulled over?
I'm not sure about 9, 10 o'clock, somewhere in there probably.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Now, where were you when you got pulled over?
On Keaton Circle.
And is that in Fort Myers?
Yes, ma'am.
Where were you right before you got pulled over?
We was leaving Eric's house.
And why did you go to Eric's house?
Change clothes, we had to go to school.
Okay. Were y'all running late that morning?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, when you got pulled over, what happened?
I say about 4 or 5 officers came and opened everybody's little car with the car.
Okay. Now, going step by step, what do you remember happening first?
Officers came to the car. They just like told us all our doors. They opened them. We was the van, so they opened our doors. That's where we were headed.
Okay. And did you recognize the uniform of the officers?
That's it.
Okay. And do you know where the officers worked?
I was on Robert's was on the job side, and I don't know the 2 officers. On my side was a female officer and a male officer.
Okay. And are they from Fort Myers Police?
Yes, ma'am.
Other than the Fort Myers police officers, did you see anyone else come up to the car?
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. I don't know who he was. I don't know.
Okay. Was he in a uniform?
I know he just had a big blue vest on. I said, yeah, you know, that up.
Okay. And so when they first came up to the car, they asked you, or asked everyone where they were going?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what happened at that point?
Officer comes out of the left, and then he came back and took my brother out. And they asked everybody for their cell phones.
Okay. And do you recall which officer asked everyone for their cell phone?
I was about to ask everybody, do we have one? We said, yes, sir. And like, yeah, I had them out to the later officer.
Okay. And do you know the name of the female officer?
No, ma'am.
Do you know why they asked for your phone?
No, ma'am.
And so your brother was already out of the car when you asked for your cell phone?
No, he was still in it. The officer came back, he asked everybody for his cell phone. He asked for his phone out.
Okay. And what happened after you gave your cell phone to the female officer?
We just sat there for a little bit, and then came back. My brother's already out, so he came back and took Eric.
Okay.
He went until they got the car.
Did you see what was happening when Eric was taken out of the car?
No, ma'am.
And when I say taken out, or you said taken out, did they physically grab Eric and pull him out of the car?
No, they asked him to get out.
Okay. And did he get out when they asked him to?
Yes, ma'am.
So at that point, was it just yourself and Charles left in the car?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what happened at that point?
They came and got me. Walked to the back of the car. They officer, she searched me, she put me in the car.
Okay. Do you recall which officer asked you to get out of the car?
The female officer.
And what happened when you got out of the car?
She searched me, put me in the car, and then put me in the back seat of her vehicle.
Now, was the vehicle you were taken to, was that a marked Fort Myers police vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
And was anyone in the car with you?
No, ma'am.
And what happened once you were placed in the police vehicle?
I saw Charles get out of the other van, and then he got walked to, I think, it was a black car. It wasn't marked for mine. It was a black car. And he did Saturday search him, put him in the car, so put him in the vehicle.
Now, did you see what happened to Eric at that point?
No, ma'am, I didn't see Eric.
And did you see your brother Jeremy?
No, ma'am.
And how long did you stay in the Fort Myers police vehicle at the scene of the traffic stop?
Probably about 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. And where did you go next?
We go to the Pagefield at Penny Building.
Now, had you ever been to the FDLE building before?
No, ma'am.
Did you even know it was there?
No, ma'am.
And what happened once you got to the FDLE building?
I stayed back still in the car about 2 to 3 hours.
Now, was there air conditioning on in the car?
Yes, ma'am.
And was anyone in the car with you?
No, ma'am. Just go to this lady officer, female officer.
Now, do you know which part of the FDLE building the patrol car was parked at?
No, ma'am.
And you were in the car for about 3 hours.
About school 3 hours, ma'am.
And what happened? What happened so they took you out of the car?
They took me out, and I walked me in. We go in there, took me out the handcuffs and sat me down in the office.
And can you describe the office for us?
Well, it was desk and FBI stuff all over the shelves. The guy who was really awesome was he had major drugs, but like took pictures and with stuff and drugs and stuff.
Okay. And do you recall if there was a phone in the room?
Yes, ma'am, was a phone.
Did you ever use the phone?
No, ma'am.
And why not?
I asked him, can I use the phone? He said, no.
Now, when you were taken to this room, were you left in the room alone?
No, ma'am. For about 5 to 10 minutes, then the officer came back in and offered me food. I told him, no, I can't use the phone. And he told me, no.
And why were you asking to use the phone?
I was talking to my mom and my order, so what's going on?
And they told you no when you asked to use the phone?
No, ma'am.
Did you have your cell phone?
No, ma'am.
Now, were you ever questioned by any of the officers?
No, ma'am.
Were you ever allowed to leave FDLE?
No, ma'am.
You never left the building?
Well, I did, yeah.
Okay. What happened when you found out you were allowed to leave the building?
We walked out, at first, I waited my door, my brother came up, we walked out to these double two brothers, got more out, watched the double doors, and 2 detective officers that had talked to us, and, they were searched the van, they let us go.
Okay. Now, you said there were 2 detectives that spoke with you, correct? Did they ask you anything about a homicide?
I just asked you questions about Javon Waterloo and Sasha.
Now, around what time was it when you were allowed to leave?
I'm not sure the approximate time.
Was it still light outside?
No, like, it was near the dark.
Now, have you ever been convicted of a felony? How many?
2.
Was that before or after this incident? Okay. Now, did you ever get your phone back? Did you ever have a chance to see or talk to your brother while you were at FDLE?
I saw him once. He walked out the door, and he looked at me, I looked at him, and he went like in hospital. I was like asking like, wow, brother, y'all supposed to be talking to him, what are y'all doing? They tell him to calm down, all that stuff, and they walked by, I ain't seen him.
Okay. Did you ever see Eric again that same day?
No, man.
And did you see Charles again that same day?
I saw Charles once, in the park, I was in the parking lot, and he was like through the glass, big glass, where he was at the room he was in, that's what I saw him.
Now, before you left the scene of the traffic stop, did the officers ever And when you and your brother Jeremy left, was anyone else with you when you left FDLE?
No,
And where did you go when you left FDLE?
it was my mom's job, that was the rest.
And just if I can have just one moment.
Yes.
Nothing further, Judge.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mays. So Mr. Rivera is your cousin
Yes, sir.
and a good friend of yours?
Yes, sir.
Charles Wardlow is a good friend of yours?
Yes, sir.
You hang out together a lot?
I wouldn't say a lot, but sometimes it was a lot, yeah.
You were hanging out together that day on November the 30th, right?
Yes, sir, we got.
Did you hang out with them earlier in the week?
Yes, sir.
So you were in a car with your brother and you're behind Eric Rivera, is that right?
Yes, sir.
When the car stopped? When the car stopped?
When the car stopped, yes.
Okay. So your testimony is everyone that you saw got handcuffed? Everyone you were able to see who was in the car?
No, sir. I saw Charles being in front.
All right. What about your brother Jeremy?
I didn't see him. He got walked to the back of the car, and I never turned around to look.
So you didn't see that?
No, sir.
And you say you had a phone with you.
Yes, sir.
Your phone wasn't even working then, was it?
Oh, sir.
But you still carried it around with you?
Yes, sir.
And you say you gave it to the female officer who transported you back?
Yes, sir.
And she kept it and never gave it back?
I did everything with that.
Now, when you left the Florida Department of Law Enforcement later that night, a block away from there, no matter how you turn, there are stores everywhere, aren't there?
Yes, sir.
So with or without your phone, you could have stopped anywhere and made a phone call if you wished to do so after you left FDLA. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Do you think the people at FDLE didn't know there were stores everywhere?
Objection, cause for speculation.
Sustained.
But there were stores everywhere, right?
Yes, sir.
So that anyone who wanted to, whether they had a phone with them at that moment or not, could have pulled to a store or a gas station, which are everywhere in that area, and placed a telephone call if they wished to do so.
Objection, argument, answered. Overruled.
Well, you know that, don't you?
Yes, sir.
So you met with detectives in a room, a conference room.
Yes, sir.
Did they ask you any questions about the homicide of Sean Taylor?
Yes, sir.
Did they ask you any questions about where Eric Rivera was the night of the murder?
Yes, sir.
How long did they talk to you?
About 10 to 15 minutes, I think.
Right. So you're in a room with a homicide detective from the Miami-Dade Police Department, right?
I don't know the homicide detective, I know the detective.
And these people are in Fort Myers. They traveled there to investigate the murder of Sean Taylor. You know that, don't you?
I know that
Objection
now.
calls for speculation.
And
It's vague, you know that.
I answered already, I know that now. Okay.
you're found in a room, I beg your pardon, in a car with Eric Rivera and Charles Wardlow, right?
Yes, sir.
And they didn't ask you one question about the homicide or where Mr. Rivera was that night?
Sustained.
You care a lot about your cousin, don't you, Mr. Rivera?
Yes, sir.
You've been in touch with him since November the 30th of 2007, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
I beg your pardon?
Yes, sir.
And how many times have you been convicted of a felony?
5.
That's all the questions I have to say.
Now, Devon, you were held there for about 10 hours, is that correct?
I'm not sure. I would say 10 hours. I don't know approximate hours, I would say.
Okay. But,
Sorry, I didn't hear the answer.
I don't know approximate hours.
but you were on your way to school when you were stopped, correct?
Yeah.
And it was dark when you left. And it was dark when you left, correct?
I was married.
Now, and you were there for several hours, but they only spoke to you for 10 or 15 minutes.
Objection, please.
Now, were you ever told you were a suspect in a murder investigation?
No, ma'am.
Now, there were stores all around the FDLE building, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. About how long would it have taken you to walk to those stores?
It's like, I don't know. I'm not sure.
And did you have any money on you that day?
No, ma'am.
And did you ever try to leave the FDLE building?
No, ma'am.
And why not?
I was just sitting in the office, asking can I go, they told her no, asking me to phone, I told her no.
Nothing further, Judge.
Great, maybe see you, thank you.
You said to call Eric Rivera Sr.
Do you swear or affirm that you're about to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
All right, sir, have a seat. So microphone here, speak in, we can all hear you. And Mr. Brothers, when you're ready, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Rivera.
Good afternoon.
Now, if you could state your full name for the record.
Eric Rivera, Sr.
And Mr. Rivera, what type of work do you do?
I own my own business, a delivery company.
And how long have you owned that business?
Approximately 11 years.
Now, this is going to be a stupid question, but how are you related to Eric Rivera Jr.?
I'm his father.
And going back to 2007, how old was Eric at that time?
He was 17 years old.
And was Eric in school at the time?
Yes, he was.
Was he involved in any activities at school?
Yes, he was involved in football.
You can answer.
Yeah, he played football.
Was he a good football player?
Yes, he was.
Now, other than Eric, how many other children do you have?
I have 3 other children.
And what are their names?
I have Jerica Rivera, Marquesha Maldonado, and Elissa Rivera.
Now, I want to draw your attention to November 30th of 2007. Do you remember that date?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And did you see Eric that day?
November 2000. Yes, I did.
Okay. Around what time was it when you saw Eric?
I seen Eric approximately late morning, probably, no, it was late afternoon on the 30th, probably around 5, 6 o'clock in the evening.
Now, I want to go back to what were you doing earlier that morning of November 30th?
Early that morning, I went to work early that morning.
Okay. And did you work the entire day?
No, I didn't work the entire day.
And why not?
Well, I own my own business. I just go early in the morning, make sure all my crews are loaded up, and once they get on the road, then I'm pretty much done for my morning.
Okay. And did you ever get any information that something happened to Eric Jr.?
Yes, I received a phone call.
Just goes to the effect of the listener. Okay. And you received a phone call that day?
Yes, I received a phone call. I was actually getting a haircut, and I received a phone call from one of my football players, because I coach football. I'm part of the youth football program, working with the children, and he called me and he said, "Coach."
Same argument, Judge.
You say you received information, you did something.
16.
Okay. So you received a phone call from one of your football players.
Yes.
And based on that phone call, what did you do?
Well, he told me that,
Don't go into what you were told, but just state what you were doing or what you did in response to the phone call.
in response to the phone call, I said, he told me that my son was...
Objection to
Okay, response to what you did. What you got?
Oh, what I did at that time, as I got off the phone with him, I proceeded to where they said my son...
Objection again.
You can answer.
Yeah. I got in my vehicle, then I went over to where they said my son was located at, and being detained or arrested.
Okay. Now, let me stop there. Where were you when you got this phone call?
I was probably 30 minutes south of where I live, getting a haircut.
Okay. And where did you go after you got the phone call?
I went, it was probably a couple miles away from where I lived at.
Okay. So you went close to your home.
Yes.
And what was the reason you went there?
I went there because...
Don't go into what someone told you, but just go into why you did it.
I went there to see my son.
Okay. And when you went to that location, was Eric there?
No, he wasn't.
Okay. And what did you do when you saw Eric wasn't there?
Oh, when he wasn't there, the first thing I did is went to the Lee County Sheriff Department.
Okay. Now, which Sheriff Department location did you go to?
I went to the Lee County Sheriff Department. It's the county sheriff office.
And is that near the courthouse?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And what happened while you were there?
Oh, when I went there, I went to the front office and I was told I was looking for my son. And at that point, they said that they asked me my son's name. I told them his name. And they said that they didn't know where they didn't have anything on him being arrested or picked up by law enforcement.
And around what time was it when you went to the Sheriff's Department?
When I went there, It was probably around 11 in the morning.
And what did you do when you left the sheriff's department?
When I left the sheriff's department, I then went, well, the sheriff's department told me to go to the city police department because it was a city police department jurisdiction. So I said, okay. Went to the city police department, which was right across the street. So I went there and went to the front office and asked them the same question. Did they have my son in custody? And the guy at the front office told me, he said, no, we don't have anybody by my son's name in custody or arrested.
Okay. And is the Fort Myers Police Station also downtown?
Yes, it is.
Just may I approach?
Yes.
Rivera, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as Defense Exhibit A as an apple 4. Do you recognize that?
Yes, the city police department.
And is that the same police department location you went to on November 30th of 2007?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that a fair and accurate depiction of how the building looked on November 30th of 2007?
Yes.
Judge Defense seeks to admit Defense Exhibit A4 into evidence.
It'll be admitted.
Exhibit marked identification. Defense exhibit marked identification A4 now becomes defense exhibit A.
Now, when you went to the police department and you learned Eric wasn't there, what did you do next?
The city police department?
Yes.
When they said he wasn't, I asked him, I said, well, is there any other place that I can go to find out my son was being arrested or detained by a police officer? And they said, no, we would just know here or at the county sheriff's department. And at that time, and I didn't have anywhere else to go and any other options, so then I just went home and waited to see if I could hear anything about my son's location.
Okay. Now, did you have a house phone that was working at the time, a landline telephone?
Yes.
Okay. And did Eric Jr. also have a cell phone at the time?
Yes, he did.
Did you ever try calling Eric on his cell phone?
Yes, we tried calling the cell phone and didn't get no answer.
Okay. And do you recall how many times you tried calling him on his cell phone?
It was several times. I don't know the exact amount, but it was several times that I tried calling him.
Okay. And when you went home, had Eric called home?
No. Nobody had heard from Eric.
Home?
No, nobody had heard from Eric. I was sitting home. I received a phone call after several hours. I received a phone call that the phone call, they called myself, somebody called my cell phone and they said they were a detective or officer of law, and they said that they had word that I was looking for my son. And at that time I said, yes, I've been looking for my son for several hours. And they said, well, we know we have your son, and we're going to send some officers to come pick you up and bring you over to where your son's at.
Okay. Now, do you recall around what time it was when you received that phone call?
It was late evening, late afternoon, approximately, I want to say 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, somewhere around that time.
Okay. And what time was it when you first started looking for Eric?
Between 10:30, 11:30, late morning sometime. Situation was.
Okay. And did someone come pick you up?
Yes, two guys in regular dress clothes pulled up to my house in a pickup truck and said they were there to pick me up and take me to my son.
Okay. And so was the pickup truck marked with any Fort Myers police insignia?
No, it's a regular pickup truck.
Okay. And you said they were in plain clothes?
Yes.
Do you know the names of the officers or the people who came to pick you up?
No, I don't know their names.
Okay. And when they picked you up, what happened at that point?
I got in the truck with them and they were taking me over to my son.
This may approach.
Please.
Mr. Rivera, I'm going to start by showing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit A as an apple 1. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what is depicted in A1?
That's a picture of the building that the two guys in the pickup truck took me to.
And is that an accurate depiction of how it looked on November 30th of 2007?
Yes.
And I'm showing you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit A3. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what is depicted in A3?
The building that they brought me to.
Okay. And is that a fair and accurate depiction of how it looked in November 30th of 2007?
Yes.
And Judge Defense would seek to admit Defense Exhibits A1 as well as A2.
They will be admitted.
Defense exhibit, marked by identification A1 now become defense exhibit B. Exhibit marked by identification A3 now becomes defense exhibit C.
And just may I have permission to publish these?
Yes.
What's passing through, and then we'll catch up again.
that building before?
No.
Okay. At the building, do you know where Eric was at that point?
When I first arrived there?
Yes.
Oh, no, I didn't know where he was.
Okay. And you stated they wanted to ask you questions before they would let you see Eric?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall who was speaking with you at that point?
I don't have his name. I don't know his name. I really can't recall who he was. He just said he was a detective.
Okay. And where were you when they asked you questions?
I was inside the building, and they just sat me down at the desk when I got into the building, and that's during the questioning, I just told them that, I wanted to see my son. I was at the point then where, I had to see him because hours went by before I seen him. So at that point, I just said, okay, we'll take you to your son. And
Now, did they take you to Eric?
yes, at that point they did.
And where was Eric when you saw him?
He was in another room, looked like a conference room.
Okay. And how did Eric look when you saw him?
Oh, when I walked in, he had a different look on his face. He had a worried look, like a scared look, very tired looking, eyes were really red.
And were you allowed to talk to him?
Yes.
And were you speaking with Eric privately?
Yes.
Now, when you were speaking with Eric, did you know that Eric had already been questioned by law enforcement?
Yes.
Do you know if Eric had already given a recorded statement?
Well, I don't recall if they said it was recorded when the detective talked to me before I went to the room, but he did tell me that Eric did give a statement.
Now, after you spoke with Eric, did the detectives allow you to stay there and stay with Eric while they spoke with him further?
Can you repeat that question?
After you spoke with Eric privately, did the detectives offer to allow you to stay at FDLE while the detectives spoke to Eric?
Oh no, once they allowed me to talk to him, and when they escorted me out the room, they ended up escorting me back to the pickup truck and took me back home.
And do you know around what time it was when you arrived back home?
It was late evening, probably, I want to say between 6:30 and 8, somewhere around there.
Now, Mr. Rivera, have you ever been convicted of a crime before?
Yes, as a teenager.
Okay, and how many times?
One time.
How old are you now?
She was home.
Now, before you left FDLE, did you ever, or let me rephrase that, before you left, did the detectives tell you they were still going to question Eric?
No, they didn't.
Did they tell you Eric was under arrest?
No, they didn't.
And did you ever see Eric with a cell phone when you were speaking with him?
No.
The conference room where Eric was located when you saw him, do you recall if there was a landline telephone in the conference room?
No, there wasn't.
If I could have just one moment. Now, Mr. Rivera, going back to when you were a teenager, was that a felony conviction or a misdemeanor?
It was a felony.
Okay. And how old were you, if you recall?
19.
Now, you stated you initially went to the Lee County Sheriff's Department, correct?
Yes.
About how far is that from your house?
Around 10 minutes.
Okay, so about a 10-minute drive.
Yes.
Do you know how far it would be in miles?
In miles, probably about 10 miles.
And you stated that the Fort Myers Police Department was across the street?
Yes.
Now, where was your wife when you first started looking for her? Do you know where she was?
Yeah, she was at work.
Okay. And what type of work does she do?
She's a registered nurse.
Okay. Did you speak with your wife on the phone while you were looking for Eric?
Yes, briefly, but she can't conversate on the phone that much when she's at work.
Okay. And when you went home, was your wife home?
When I got home,
The
after I
first
left the
time?
police department?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, she was home at that time.
Okay. Now, did you speak with either Jeremy and Devon's parents or Charles Warlow's parents that day?
Late that evening, we talked to Charles Wallow's mom.
Okay. And did you ever see Charles that day?
No.
And you only saw Eric for about an hour, is that correct?
Probably a little bit less than an hour. It's probably around 45 minutes, an hour probably.
Nothing further.
Nothing further.
All right, let's stand.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rivera.
Good afternoon.
Your son's birthday is what? The defendant's birthday?
His date of birth?
Yeah.
April 4th, 1990.
So on November the 30th of 2007, he was about 17 years old and 8 months roughly?
Yes.
He was in the 12th grade,
Yes.
reads and writes.
Can you repeat that?
He could read and write,
Yes.
had no learning disabilities,
Outside the scope, right,
no learning disabilities.
No.
Your cellular telephone is what? 239-229-0874?
Yes.
Has been for years, right?
Yes.
All the way back to 2007.
I think it was.
Your home phone is 690-0940?
239.
239, all the prefixes would be 239,
Yes.
right? Has been for years, going all the way back to 2007.
Yes.
Your wife's cellular phone was 229-2248,
Yes.
going all the way back to 2007.
Yes.
You said you had 3 daughters. Who's the oldest of the 3?
Jericho Rivera.
Her cell phone? 258 So I think we left off talking a little bit about telephone numbers and who was trying to find Eric Rivera Jr. You were trying to find him?
Yes.
Your wife was trying to find him?
Well, my wife at the time was at work.
All right, so she was not trying to find him.
Yeah, when she got off work, she called around and see if anybody seen him.
She went home, didn't she?
Yes.
Wasn't she home with you before you left to go to Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Before I went to the sheriff's department?
Sure. No, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement where you saw Eric Rivera Jr.
Yes, she was home at that time.
All right, where was your daughter Marquesa?
I'm not sure where she was at that point.
What's her age in relation to the defendant?
Objection outside of skill 38.
What's her age in relation to the defendant?
What's her age in relation?
What's her date of birth?
Her date of birth? She was born August 17th, 1989.
And Jerica, what's her date of birth?
Her date of birth was May 13th, 1988.
Was Jerica at the house?
At our house at what point?
Before you went to Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yeah, I think she was there.
You said you have her cell phone number in your phone?
Yes.
If you looked at your phone, would that help you refresh your recollection about what her phone number is?
If I look at my phone and see what her number is?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, could you take a look?
Objection, no. This is more testimony that she's trying to hold.
Just saying, we're going to get that question first.
What phone did you use to try to find Eric Rivera Jr.? Your cell phone?
Yes, my phone.
Did you also use your home phone?
No.
So you told the jury earlier today, just a little while ago, that you had made several calls to your son, right? On his cell phone.
Yes.
From your cell phone. Right?
Yes.
Now, you've been asked about this before, haven't you? About whether you made any telephone calls to your son's cell phone?
Well, at what point was that?
You gave a deposition in this case, didn't you?
Yes.
So you came and met with me at some point? Is that right?
Yes.
With your son's attorney being present?
The attorney, yeah, at that time, yes.
Okay. And I had asked you about whether you had made any telephone calls. On March the 9th of 2011, which was a couple of years ago, you gave a deposition at the state attorney's office. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Right. Do you remember being asked, and you were under oath at the time, right? Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
And were you asked this question, and did you give this answer on page 25, starting at line 6? All right. So as you sit here today, you don't know if you made a single telephone call to his cell phone. Answer, I'm not sure. You want to see that?
Yes, you can show me.
Sure.
Okay.
So, is your memory better today than it was 2 years ago?
My memory's pretty much the same as it was 2 years ago.
Really, your memory wasn't that great about everything that took place 2 years ago, was it?
Objection, already noted.
I'm just asking you. When we were asking you questions back in 2011, Your memory wasn't that...
Objection is proper.
Just asking a question. When I was asking...
Make reference to state other question.
I'm just trying to ask a question. When I was asking you questions back in 2011 about some things that took place on November the 30th of 2007, your memory wasn't that great about it then, was it?
Objection, argument.
I'm asking you. Your memory wasn't that great about it then, was it?
Yes, it was.
Right, but at that time you weren't sure if you had made a single telephone call to your son, right?
I probably heard the question wrong at that point, but I clearly understand what the question is today.
Well then, if you made such a telephone call, it would be on his cellular telephone records, wouldn't it?
I'm not sure if it would.
You also said a little bit earlier today that they didn't tell you your son was being arrested. Didn't you also say that a little bit earlier here today?
They didn't say to my son, who is they?
The people at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, by the time you left there that day, you knew that your son was arrested, didn't you?
By the time I left the sheriff's department or the city police department?
By the time, first of all, you know what the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is, don't you?
Objection, argumentative.
You personally know what the agency, Florida Department of Law Enforcement is, don't you?
Do I personally know it?
Yes. You knew what it was 20 years ago, didn't you?
You can decide right now.
Mr. Rivera, I'm going to ask you again. In 2007, November of
I've asked you accurate or he's never asked this question.
In 2007, did you know of the existence of the law enforcement agency, Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Did I know what it stands for, or did I know where it was?
Did you know what it was, first of all?
There's some affiliated with law enforcement. It's a department affiliated with law enforcement.
Did you know of the agency, Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Objection, ask, answer.
You went to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement agency on November the 30th, 2007, correct?
Yes.
I'm asking you if you had heard the name of that agency before.
I've probably heard of it before.
You were generally familiar with the area, weren't you? Where the agency was?
With the area, yes.
Yeah. Is that right?
Excuse me?
Is that correct? You were generally familiar with the area?
I'm familiar with the area, yes.
You knew that your son was arrested when you got to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. They told you that, didn't they?
When I originally got the call about my son that morning, they were saying he was being arrested that morning.
When you got to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, you said you sat down and you talked with someone, right?
Yes.
Did that person or did they not tell you your son was arrested?
I don't recall them saying that he was arrested.
All right. Do you remember this question and answer? I am going to start on page 26 at line 14.
Said he didn't recall.
Show it to him,
Page 26.
Right.
I'll start at line 16.
Just read that.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Does it refresh my recollection that they told the detective told me that my son was being arrested?
Well, they did, didn't they?
I don't recall him saying he was being arrested. I recall him saying that he gave a statement in reference to a murder case.
Right, it's with him. Oh, he sat me down and he asked me.
He says he doesn't recall, Judge. It's not a fabrication.
He sat me down and he asked me, I think he asked me, did I know why my son was being arrested? And I think I told him, I said, no, not really. And he explained to me what he was being arrested for at that time. So when you got to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, they did tell you that your son was being arrested.
I don't recall him telling me that.
Do you deny saying that in your sworn deposition under oath?
Oh, no, I'm not denying it.
So you don't remember it today, whether or not the police told you when you got to the department looking for your son that he was in fact arrested?
I don't recall.
They told you he was arrested for murder, didn't they?
Objection.
I don't recall that.
So you've been looking for your son for a while, right?
For hours, yes.
Okay, and you've already told the jury that you've been trying to find him with your cell phone to his cell phone, right?
I gave him some calls, and I also went downtown to the police department looking for him also. They said they never heard of his name and they don't recall it.
And you know that the cell phone is the best way to reach him, right?
I don't know if it's the best way to reach him, but it's the way I tried to reach him at that point.
Isn't that the way you usually get a hold of him?
By cell
That ain't
phone?
the way I usually get a hold of him, because he lives with me.
All right, well, do you remember being asked these questions and giving these answers, same sworn deposition under oath on March the 9th of 2011? Firstly, starting at line 12, all right, so from the time you first got the telephone call from your son's friend until that moment when the Florida Department of Law Enforcement picked you up, did you try to call your son's cell phone at all? Answer, I can't recall if I tried to call his cell phone or not. Question, how else would you get in touch with him? Answer, well, his cell phone is probably the only way I can get in touch with him. But when I was told he was arrested, I don't know, I can't recall calling him. That's what you said then, right?
I don't really recall that conversation I had with him in 2009, word for word.
Do you want to see it?
I can take a look at it if you want me to, but I just don't recall exactly where our word for word was when I spoke to you in 2009.
Right. Well, that's the second or third time we discussed whether or not you had called his cell phone.
Sustained. You asked another question regarding
Right, do you agree then that the cell phone was the best way to get a hold of him back then?
At that point, yeah, that was my first thing, calling his cell phone, trying to find out where he was at, because he wasn't in my presence at the time.
And when the detective called you and told you that your son was at the department, they gave you some information about where the location was, didn't they?
But when he called me, he never told me where my son was. No department or anything, that was never mentioned.
Didn't he give you some information you couldn't quite remember what it was when you testified in 2011?
objection. Sustained, next witness. Well, I told the jury at the beginning what the lawyer says is not evident. Continuous through.
All right, do you remember being asked this question and giving this answer?
What's the objecting on the last question? Page.
Page 183 of the transcript, starting at the bottom, 25. And I'm specifically focusing on page 184, starting at line 9, 8 or 9. I beg your pardon?
What was the question again?
The question was, didn't they give you some information about where your son was when they first called you?
You want me to answer that?
Well, the judge is reviewing something for a second.
Yeah, go ahead. You can answer that question. You can answer.
Can you repeat it again, please?
Sure. Didn't the police department give you some information about where your son was when they first called you?
The police department?
Whatever officer it was that called you, didn't he give you some information about where your son was located, but you just couldn't recall the precise location of it when you gave your testimony in June of 2011?
Oh, not at all. When he called me, he never said where my son, he never gave me no information where my son was.
All right, so Judge, it's at this point that I would ask to be able to read him from page 183 over to 184, line 13.
Okay.
This is both serious questions, answers, Judge.
One question, one answer.
All right, question. Okay, when did you hear anything about your son? Answer, I got a phone call several hours later. It was probably late, probably in the evening, around evening time. It was several hours later I received a phone call on my cell phone. It was, and then there's a couple of dashes from the court reporter. He said his name was, and there's a couple of dashes from the court reporter. It was a detective, comma, and he told me what his name was. I can't recollect what his name was. He at the time told me, there's a couple of dashes. He asked me, there's a couple of dashes. He told me that he heard I was looking for my son for his whereabouts, and I said, yes, I am. And he said, well, you know, we have him down, there's a couple of dashes, wherever that place was, comma. I don't know the address or the name of it. And he said, we'll be there to pick you up, to bring you to your son, probably within the next 30 minutes to an hour. So those dashes are where you were hesitating because you couldn't remember the location that they had told you when they called you on the day of November the 30th of 2007. Isn't that true?
Well, he never gave me the location. And the hesitation was probably because I was so worried and concerned about my son at the time.
Do you deny making these statements in your sworn testimony in June of 2011?
Do I deny making the statement that
Yeah.
you told me where my son was?
That we have him down wherever that place was? Yeah.
They didn't
Did I
tell
say
me.
that?
They didn't tell me where my son was when they called me. I had no idea where I was going when they picked me up.
Do you deny stating that when you were asked in June of 2011?
Well, I don't recall what I said in 2009 or 11 when you just told me. I don't recall exactly what I said then.
When the police picked you, but you waited 30 minutes to an hour, right?
Exactly what I said then.
When the police picked you, but you waited 30 minutes to an hour, right?
For them to come pick me up?
Sure.
I'll probably figure around 30 minutes.
Did you try to call your son at all during that time period?
During what time period?
The 30 minutes that you say you waited.
Oh, no.
Why didn't you try to call his cell at that time?
Because the phone call received said they were going to come pick me up and take me to where my son was.
They did pick you up, didn't they?
Yes.
They were polite, weren't they?
Yes.
You didn't ask them anything, did you?
Oh, no, I didn't talk very much at all.
So whatever discussion you had was very brief. You didn't ask them anything, and they took you back to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, right?
Yes.
You get back to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and you just had a very short conversation with the people who were there. Is that right?
Yes.
And the reason that you wanted to go to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement was so you could be with your son, right?
Yes, so I could see what was going on with my son, yes.
And so you could give him moral support and not for any other reason. Is that correct?
Objection, relevance, outside the scope.
Did you hear the question?
Can you repeat it?
Yes. The reason that you went to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement was to see your son, give him moral support, and not for any other reason.
The reason I wanted to see my son because I was worried about his whereabouts. I hadn't heard from him in several hours.
All right. So you wanted to know his whereabouts.
Yes.
And you wanted to see him, right? And you wanted to give him moral support, right?
moral support. No, I wasn't there to give him moral support. I was there to find out where he was and to see how my son was doing.
Right, and not for any other reason. Do you agree with that?
Well, the reason I wanted to see my son is because I want to know where his whereabouts were.
All right, and that's the reason you went there. Do you agree with that?
I went to see how he was doing and was he okay? Yeah, he's my son. He was a kid at that point. Any parent is concerned about their son.
All right, so you got there, you had a brief discussion with the police when you arrived there, right?
Yes.
And they told you he was under arrest, didn't they?
I don't recall them telling me.
Objection asked and answered. Repeat and
The police, when he got there. You thought he was under arrest or detained anyway before you got there, didn't you?
When I originally got the phone call, they said the police had my son, yes.
All right. And after they talked with you, they gave you an opportunity to meet with your son, didn't they?
objection asked and answered.
I asked him about asking that. After they talked with you, and they were polite, weren't they, the police?
Objection asked and answered.
I mean, when you got to the station. They were polite when you got to the station, weren't they?
The detective I talked to, yeah, he just asked me several questions.
And that discussion was very brief, right?
Yeah, it was very much brief. I was trying to see my son at that point.
Well, he asked you if you knew anything about your son and the Sean Taylor homicide, didn't he?
Yes.
And in fact, had you asked your son?
Objection outside the scope.
We're talking about what the detective talked with him about.
Rather than having a discussion, we should decide.
Had you personally asked your son earlier that week if he had anything to do with the Sean Taylor homicide?
Outside the scope of direct action.
They asked you about whether your son had anything to do with the Sean Taylor homicide when you got there, didn't they?
Didn't ask anything about any questions.
They did ask you about whether you knew anything about your son and the Sean Taylor homicide when you got there, didn't they?
Yes, they asked me that.
They told you that your son had given a statement.
Objection calls for your check.
They told you that your son had given a statement, right?
Yes.
And they gave you an opportunity to meet with him privately, didn't they? They gave you an opportunity to meet with him privately.
Yes.
And you met with him for about 45 minutes.
Approximately.
That's all the questions I have at this time. I do want to ask you one other thing. You looked at some photographs of your family a little bit earlier, including the defendant?
I didn't show him.
No.
I just did the,
You can do that.
yeah. you to step down for just one moment. And I'm showing you what's been marked for the record as Defense Exhibit B. Now, do you recognize, well, first off, let's go back. What's Defense Exhibit B?
It's a picture of the building that they had my son at.
Okay. And what is this in the photo that I'm pointing to?
I'm not sure. It's like some type of building.
Is that air traffic control tower?
And leading.
It looks like that, yes.
And if you could take your seat again. Now, Mr. Rubin asked you about, did you know?
Yes, he asked me.
Now, what is, just so the jury can understand, the location where this FDLE building is, what is in the area immediately surrounding it?
What's in the area surrounding it? Airport.
Okay. And do you know the name of the airport?
Just Pagefield Airport.
Now, Pagefield Airport, is that a normal commercial airport where, I guess, like Delta or Northwest or any major airlines fly into it? Is that a major commercial airport that, like Delta, Northwest, American, any of those airlines fly into?
No, it's just like a private airport. It's a small airport.
Okay. And other than the airport, what else is in that immediate area?
Other than the airport, the youth football field where I coach and participate on the executive board of directors of the program.
Okay. Now, have you lived in Fort Myers your entire life, is that correct?
Yes.
And you have heard of FDLE before, is that correct?
Florida Department, I recall, I think I've heard of it before, yes.
Now, have you ever seen any patrol cars driving around town that said FDLE on the side?
No.
Have you ever seen patrol cars driving around town that said Lee County Sheriff?
Yes.
Have you ever seen patrol cars driving around town that said Fort Myers Police?
Yes.
And you testified that when you went to first the Sheriff's Department and the Fort Myers Police Department, did you ever think to go to FDLE?
Oh, never.
And why not?
I didn't even know that building was there. I didn't even know that building was.
Okay. Now, did you have a chance to review your deposition before you testified here today? The deposition Mr. Rubin was referring to?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Has any
That was kind of probably about a week ago.
Okay. Of the deposition or your testimony at a different proceeding?
Oh, yeah, you guys gave me a copy of the deposition of the hearing that we had.
Okay, but not the one where it was just yourself and Mr. Rubin was asking you questions?
Oh, no, that one, the one that I reviewed was the one at the court hearing that we had.
Okay. Now, do you recall word for word what you said in your deposition?
Oh, no.
Do you recall word for word what you said at the court hearing?
No.
Now, everything that you've testified here today, is that the truth to the best of your memory?
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes.
Move to strike.
Now, Mr. Rivera, do you recall if you ever spoke to Eric Jr. on the phone on November 30th?
Oh, no, I didn't speak to him on the phone.
Okay. But you do remember trying to call him?
Yes.
And did you ever receive a phone call from Eric Jr. on your phone?
No.
Did you ever receive a phone call from Eric Jr. on the house phone?
No.
Do you know if Eric Jr. memorized your cell phone number?
Objection.
think?
And do you know, well, I'll strike that. And to your knowledge, did any officers ever come and ask you to speak to Eric before he was taken to FDLE?
No.
Nothing further, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Excused. Let's finish your side. Yeah.
That's the only one.
Since we need to deal with it, nothing should concern you nor should you concern yourselves about. So I'm going to ask you to return tomorrow morning at 9:30.
What time?
Calendar 9:30. I start my calendar at 8:30 in the morning. Returning there early enough to get what you've done earlier and get you down here. 20. Same rules apply tonight, applied yesterday. Don't discuss the case with anyone. Don't let anyone discuss the case with the president. Don't watch nor read about anything, nor listen to anything about the case. We're still on our schedule. We'll see you tomorrow. Soon after 9:30 so we can get you down. Yeah.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll pass your tablets forward for us, please make sure you have all your personal belongings with you. And I'll meet with you briefly outside. Now let's blow it out.
I need about 10-15 minutes before we get started up on the proffer. So.
Judge, before we do that, can I ask just a question? I know Mr. Rubin stated that he wanted Jeremy and Devon to remain available as rebuttal witnesses. Does the state still wish to have them brought back tomorrow?
That one I can confirm with
Yes.